Hello everyone, my name is Stefania Milan and I work at the University of Amsterdam. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you today, but the organizers of the pre-conference have kindly allowed me to be present in spirit and through this little video. What I want to share with you is a work in progress that I'm working on together with my team at the University of Amsterdam. Our team is called Data Active. What we do is try to rethink the future of democracy, but especially of democratic participation, activism, and governance vis-à-vis the process of datification. We are going through an epochal change, one in which the digitalization of the 60s meets massive data collection and the so-called big data. Datification represents a fundamental paradigm shift. To paraphrase Marshall McLuhan, datification alters our relationship and our understanding of the world, and in the process reconstitutes us. Someone has associated datification with surveillance capitalism to pinpoint the risks for privacy and monitoring of activism, for example, that datification brings about. Others, more optimistically, have spoken about industrial revolution of data. The Economist recently, not very originally, has claimed that data is, surprise, surprise, the new oil. What is important for us today is that the paradigm shift to datification brings about two main consequences. For a first one, the sort of ontological consequences of datification, I would like to refer to the recent book by Nick Holder and Andreas Heppel was us today, the 2016 mediated construction of reality, where they basically say that all of these changes fundamentally alter our social ontology, for example, our understanding of democracy and citizenship. But the consequences of datification also operate at the level of the social epistemology, in that they contribute to reframe, to redefine a lot of the key questions that go along with our way of knowing and sharing information in society. What I'm trying to do with my group in Amsterdam is to, through extensive data collection, which is actually what is keeping us very busy these days, trying to rethink what is the connection between data, the data that are available, but also the mechanisms of data production, for example, massive data collection, and citizenship and our being part of contemporary society. As I said, this is a work in progress, but it is inspired by a series of very important questions. So, what constitutes democratic agency today? How is its nature changes? What practices create it, empower citizens, or jeopardize it? What makes collectivity nowadays? But also, who are the drivers of the ongoing process of redefinition of citizenship? What sort of spaces, mechanisms, and actors meet the growing demand for citizen participation? And how does this redefinition of citizenship change institutions themselves? We take data and datification simultaneously as objects of contention and elements of a novel politics of the quotidian. And we try to explore forms of resilience and mobilization as democratic processes. We see these very different attitudes toward data and datification as complementary perspectives to look at how citizenship is reframed by datification. So, what we are after ultimately is understanding how contemporary engagement in grassroots and top-down data policies and practices alters the way people enact their democratic agency. Why the lack of transparency and the threats to privacy negatively alter the trust relation between people and the ruling institutions? Emerging data practices, we believe, have the ability to carve out space for a new relationship, giving completely new meaning, we hope, to the notion of democratic agency, and forces us to rethink the relationship between the state and its citizens. So, what are the building blocks towards this emerging socio-technical theory of agency for data-fied society? I can offer for your consideration 3 elements that we're working on here in Amsterdam. And these are namely a new definition of what we mean by data, the notion of data activism, and the idea of data epistemology, or better, epistemologies. So let's start from how do we define data so that we can use this concept to rethink citizenship as well. Well, we take data as a technology, but we don't associate data necessarily with the notion of technology as a tool, but with the ancient Greek noun of techne. Now, forgive my bad pronunciation of ancient Greek, which I haven't played with since high school. But what did the original techne term meant for the ancient Greek was not really a tool, an instrument, but something like making, a sort of craftsmanship, a craft. Something that, as Sandra Brahman said in a paper in 2004, is what art and engineering have in common. Now, techne also, to use a cultural studies work by Schinner, a book from 2001 called The Invention of Art, can be recasted as the human ability to make and perform. In a way, technology, techne, and data, therefore, are socially constructed. And as such, they are composed by 2 fundamental elements for us: the social technical practices of engagement, but also the cultures of engagement, as well, of course, the quintessential nature of data, which is information, so what really constitutes data. The second notion, which we believe might be useful to rethink agency, is the notion of data activism. What is data activism? Well, data activism is a broad umbrella term that allows us to put under the same header different attitudes and different socio-technical practices of engagement with data and software. It indicates those social mobilization that take a critical perspective towards data and massive data collection in particular. Most importantly, we take it as a heuristic tool to think politically about massive data collection and generate a conceptual map to approach the data 5 self, but also, for example, phenomena like self-tracking of encryption activism from an interdisciplinary perspective. What are the roles that, for example, we envision for data activists? Miriam Gutierrez, works with us as well, has identified, for example, the role of skill transfers or catalysts. Stefan Bach has spoken about empowering intermediaries that sort of mediate between novel epistemologies and data and information and software. Chris Kelty, for example, back in the days, have spoken about recursive publics. And more recently, our work has looked at new forms of reflective agencies that are emerging around data and datification. So we would like to posit data activism as one of the many possible forms of emerging data citizenship, so using data to enact democratic agency. Finally, let's look at the third element that we would like to offer for your consideration today, that of data epistemology, or if you want, data epistemologies. And I'm not talking about the general epistemology of ratification, but the sort of bottom-up grassroots epistemologies produced by citizens today. Big data and their representation tend to reify the future, sort of crystallizing one sole given reality, which is usually quantified and presented as neutral and somewhat infallible, the only possible one, and definitely narrowing down the options for alternatives, as Wendy Chun once reminded us. In other words, what is known as big data constitutes a novel, powerful system of knowledge, with its own epistemology, that is to say, its own specific way of framing, packaging, presenting, and activating information and knowledge. Now, this exercise of framing, packaging, and presenting data are productive, and they have the potential to alter not only our vision of the world, but also our own theory of knowledge, so to speak. The current emphasis on computational analysis, machine learning, for example, seen as a core and qualitatively superior ways of understanding the social world, dramatically molds the way people relate to information and knowledge. Furthermore, what is known as big data is often seductively staged, accompanied by, for example, attractive visualization and graphs that simplify reality and communicate in immediate and very efficient way. What is then the role of data and data citizenship in these dynamics. If data is not a given, nor it is ever raw, as Gitterman reminded us, data activism can be seen as an exercise in creating alternative ways of seeing the world, while opening up questions, fundamental questions, about the positivism ethos of the so-called data revolution. Nancy Fraser, in 2005, criticized the state-centric politics of representation, identifying the control by the elites over the framing of political representation a form of fundamental injustice. Making discourse, on the contrary, as Yazanov from SDS told us, entails, and I quote, producing new languages or modifying old ones so as to find worlds for novel phenomena, end of quote. So we argue that data activism practices signal that new epistemological cultures are emerging within the civil society realm. They are ways of making counter-discourses and counter-data cultures that challenge the mainstream readings of reality. Postulating a critical and an active engagement with data, its form, dynamics and infrastructures, data activists function as producers of this counter-expertise and alternative epistemologies, making sense of data as a way of knowing the world and turning data as a point of intervention. Then challenge and change the mainstream politics of knowledge and operate as mediators between the dominant algorithmic culture and the citizenry at large. While there's much more than I would like to share with you today, the making of this video has been particularly cumbersome because in Amsterdam tonight there's a lot of fans of Ajax, the local football team, in anticipation of the big final of the Europa League Cup against Manchester United. You might have heard some noise that relates exactly to that. So I leave it at that, and I hope I've simply made you curious about our work in progress, so please visit Data Active in Amsterdam.